Okay, recording started.
Thank you, Molly. Welcome everyone to today's Informative Friday presentation. Today's topic will be an introduction to replication sets. The Bales presenters today will be Robert Schmidt, Rob Velasco, and Jared Brock. Go to the next slide, Robert. All right. Before we get started today, guys, if you're not familiar with who Bales and Associates is, I'd like to take a second to tell you a little bit about Bales. We have been in the Infor ecosystem for over 26 years. We are entirely focused on the Infor three suites of products, including human capital management, finance, and supply chain, and the technology components within those suites. We've been recognized and given Infor Partnering Awards in 8 of the last 10 years. Our consultants bring over 15 years of consulting experience in the space and the equivalent in professional experience. Some of our consultants were former benefits managers, compensation managers, directors of supply chain, as well as former controllers and CFOs. We're pretty proud of our class rankings. For those of you who don't know what class is an independent organization that ranks healthcare IT performance. Class interviewed Infor customers that have been through Cloud Suite implementations, and Bales was recognized as top of class for 2020 and 2021 in the Infor partner ecosystem. Exciting news for the Infor community. Earlier this year, Bales did become part of the Nordic Consulting Group. Nordic is an industry-leading healthcare consulting firm. We will continue to operate as a wholly owned subsidiary and continue to be led by our president, Jamie Bales. Nordic will provide us with resources to fund our growth, expand our business, and support our customers more efficiently. Today's session will be recorded, and that will be sent to all the folks that are registered. If you're not registered but would like to receive the link, please go ahead and email molly.velasco@balesllc.com to request that link. Again, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Robert Schmidt.
Luke.
Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
My name is Robert Schmidt. I'm a principal technical consultant, technical project manager for Bales and Associates. Been in the Infor realm for probably around 15 plus years. Have spent time in the LSF, our previous Loss and System Foundation environment, and then now working over inside of the V11 Cloud Suite technology stack. Have done the spectrum of technology modules that we have, and happy to be here and help walk through kind of an introduction to replication sets. So just kind of a base disclaimer, we're working with and talking about implementing and upgrading Infor version 11 Cloud Suite related technology, and then just kind of normal disclaimer related items. So what are replication sets? And I'll just kind of do a read off real quick. Infor defines them as a landmark feature that enables you to copy selected data to several different targets and schedule updates to the replicated data based only on what data has changed. Replication sets can actually be even more than that, which is what we're going to kind of get into today. I'm going to talk a bit about, how can we do some configurations of those replication sets? What are some of my options that I have, some of its use, and then I'm actually going to get into 3 use cases where replication sets have provided us a strong technology tool to be able to fulfill a solution or that was had. So just kind of overall, replication sets can be used to send data from one or more specific business classes down to your own network or out of the Infor GHR database or FSM database. We can send data to kind of multiple areas, stuff like the Infor Multi-Tenant Data Lake for burst, or just the data lake in general. Additional processing and interfaces. We can do, business analysis. Over in Ion, we can do the kind of SQL statements or, on-prem use just for however it's kind of requested or needed. And then one of the newer ways that we're starting to use replication sets is, in essence, selecting data via the replication set and then sending that off into Infor Process Automation, or IPA. So. And then just kind of getting into more around options and configurations. So we have three main target areas that replication sets allow us the ability to get to. First and foremost being the Infor Multi-Tenant Data Lake. So replication sets are the main way that we pull data from GHR, from FSM, and then we send that through across to ION and we get it into the data lake itself. That's the kind of main ability for burst to grab information is from the data lake. So we got to get the data over there. I put ION separately, just in the fact that we can send the data via replication sets to ION. And if ION can communicate with another application, then by all means, we can actually send the data via a replication set out to another application via ION. So it does allow us that ability, but we do use ION to get it into the multi-tenant data lake. So, and then the other main kind of target areas being FTP via SFTP directories. So those can be the Infor multi-tenant SFTP, or you can configure those to go to your on-premise or a separate SFTP server or directory. And then the data coming out of the replication set. So we do have some, I guess, different formats. We can have that in a JSON format, an XML, and CSV. And now more recently, we can send that to columnar as well. So it allows us more functionality, just true to, the different technologies that we have and how they change over time, and Infor continuing to add to that. For a while there, we just had JSON, XML, and CSV, and then the columnar was added just very recently. So you can enable the enterprise search, so any of the business classes. So replication sets allow us the ability to tie in one or more business class to a replication set. If any of those business classes have the text search fields within them, you can include those. You don't have to, but you can include those inside of the business class definition you have, and that it does allow the index information to be sent across with the schema definition or registration that needs to be done in order to have or to send data via the replication set. And then one of the really nice ones, which I've actually been engaged with recently, was translations. So I know there are quite a few people working on the Infor area that have translations built within their system. So you can send, if you have data translations, you can send those translations. I highly advise, if you are going to set the translations, to set a default locale. That allows the ability that if a translation is not there, it will default back to the default locale in order for you to get the data that you're looking for. And then just kind of continuing on with the different more options. So I know in lots of cases, and I'm the same way, I want the ability to go back and look at historical counts or historicals. So if I run this every day for some period of time, and for some reason something's off, and I want to be able to go back and look at that, you can maintain a history count. So it allows you the ability to define out how many replications you want to hold on to. And as it rolls through and schedules, it will keep that rolling total number. So if I have, let's say, the rolling count of 60, when I hit that 61, the oldest will roll off, and then I'll maintain the newest count of that replication. So it'll hold on to that history count. Just like in a lot of the things we're doing, be cognizant of the amount of data that you're holding on to, right? Because the more counts you hold on to, the more data that's being held out there. And depending on what your replications looks like, we'll want to make sure that you're not holding on to too much out there. So what's the use, right? Realistically, how far are you going to go back? Generally speaking, we won't normally go back 9-10 months or anything like that, but you may go back to the last couple of weeks or something along those lines. And being able to, data's in GHR database, right? So this is just how did we interface it, what was in that interfaced or replication set that we sent over. So you do have a service option, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about this a little bit later, in that once the replication set completes successfully, We can define a service that it will kick off, or a service definition that we will kick off. And for those who aren't familiar with the service, that's actually tied to a process definition, which is tied to our IPA. So if I want to enable or enact an IPA and a work unit, from my replication set, I have the ability to do that. I can define that within the system, and it will generate that data and allow me to kick that process off. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that a little bit later. We have, based on the definition that we provided, right, we talked about it being changed data, which is our deltas. So replication sets were originally kind of designed around, how do I get change data from my database out to some sort of other mechanism or some sort of other place. I think a lot of people are familiar in the multi-tenant cloud. We don't have access to the database. So in past, where we would go and write queries against the database, pull that out, do what we needed to do with it, in the multi-tenant cloud, we don't have that functionality. So the ability to pull some of that data from the database and work with it, or have continued processes related to that, the replication set allows for that, and we can define that process to send the changes. But that's not always what's needed. There are instances where we would want the full set of data each time. So you can set it to both send changes and get those changes on a regular basis, but you can also go back and be able to pull a full export. Or if it is required, and I've had those instances in the past, where each time this is ran, I wanted a full set of data for it to come out and provide to my downstream related process. So I have both of those abilities. I can't set the process to do both, but I have the ability to do both within the replication sets. And then we have more around, I guess, effective dating. So we have earliest change to date include. So if I've been on GHR for, I don't know, like 10 years, maybe longer, I have quite a bit of data in that database. So if I'm writing something and I don't necessarily want to go back 10 years, maybe I'm looking in 2020 and I don't want to go before January 1st of 2020, I can set an earliest change date to include, which allows the system to know that I'm not going to go before that. I'm not going to go before January 1 of 2020 and look at that other data. But there are instances where I need to start sending information out of the system, but I need to go back multiple years or multiple periods. And depending on how much I'm pulling out, that could be a real tax on the system. So we have a backfilling data option. So this allows me the ability, if I needed to pull the last 5 years worth of information and I knew there was a lot in there, I could set my earliest change date to, let's say, January 1 of 2020, and I can pull that information from there and then send it to my, let's say, SFTP. I can then start using my backfill data to go backwards in time, either by month or by year, and then my earliest change date becomes that earlier date. But it allows me the ability to pull that in different segments via built-in or baked-in functionality, which is pretty cool. And then the system comes delivered. So you're going to come delivered in the multi-tenant cloud with both HCM and FSM replication sets. They will actually start with a prefix of FSM or HCM. And then they'll end with a suffix similar to our IPAs with _ST. And just similar to the other items we have where they come delivered processes, we generally highly suggest you don't edit any of the delivered replication sets. If you do want to have an edit done to them, it allows you the ability to duplicate that delivered replication set, and then you can start making your additions or subtractions to the business classes, or changing the logic, or doing any of those items that you have. You have the ability to make those changes, and sorry, just checking my notes. You have the ability to make those changes and then save it as your own replication set. And then if the delivereds don't work, or if the duplication, if there's a lot of changes that you need to make to that and you'd rather just start from fresh, you have the ability to create a brand new replication set. So you can do a new definition and define it however you want it to be defined. Okay. Are we looking at any questions out there, Molly?
Nothing yet.
Okay. More recently, this comes delivered with a default SFTP. So within your configurations and administration console, and when you go to database and replication, the first tab here we're looking at is the FTP setup. This will generally be defined as your Infor SFTP server or SFTP space that you have. Doesn't have to stay this, but it just comes delivered that way. It's a little bit easier to work with. So you'll have those in there. There are a few, if you want an additional FTP or if you want an on-premise SFTP to be able to send to that, you can define others. You would just define those underneath the configuration parameters. So you have a configuration parameter right here. You can have access to it. You'll notice in the component, I did rep. So there are others in here, but it allows me the ability to look at the ones tied directly to replication sets. So if I wanted to define additional SFTPs, I would define those here within my configuration parameter list. This isn't an exhaustive list, but these are generally set up nowadays coming provisioned within the multi-tenant cloud. If they're not set up in there, you can definitely set them up. You can gain access to create news and then just get the component lists, the keys that are there. There are a few others to call out. There's a couple ION registry configurations to set up. There's a tenant ID and an endpoint if you're sending data to the data lake. And then a few others that I've seen via SFTP, is having a registration destination FTP secure key via FTP password or an identity service. So just kind of a couple other configuration parameters that you may need. I'm not saying that you will have to set them up, but you may need them in order to have that replication set flow across to your target. And then data accessibility. Across the system, the question I get all the time is, what can I access via replication sets? I'll be honest, I know the answer from Infor is everything. I have not found where I can't find something yet that I've needed. So all of the delivered business classes that are built within the landmark, any of the user-defined business classes. So if you create your own business class, that's accessible. Any of the conditions that are in there. So if you have built a condition, you have access to that condition. A little while ago, we now have the ability to access the audit log data. So replication set can pull from the audit log data. And then from a fields perspective, your persistent fields, your derived and computed fields, any of your related fields, or even your user fields. So the fields that you create and configure within the system, those are accessible as well. And then just keying in on conditions. So you do have the ability to define out a conditional, like a multi-tier conditional if you need to statement. It is built in the LPL related kind of language. If you're not familiar with LPL, there is a builder kind of GUI in there that allows you to either start or build the whole condition itself and then provides it back in the LPL format. So all of that is available within the replications to build that kind of multi-tier or even simplistic condition. So, but I did hear recently on conditions, it's best to narrow down your fields. The conditions work from left to right. So if you're going to narrow down the data elements within especially your primary business class first, you're going to want those in your farthest left. So if I want my active employees, that's going to narrow down my list significantly. Then I would want that farther left in my condition than all the way on the right, because it works from left to right. So I did hear that one recently. I think it's a pretty helpful tip. Okay. So moving into our use cases.
Sorry, Robert.
Yes.
You have a couple questions.
Yes.
This is a good point for you. Okay.
Sure.
First question is, do you have an example on how to query or pull data from replication sets?
I'm going to go into my use cases here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But definitely, if you have something specific, feel free to reach out to us, and we're more than happy to have a response back. So if there's something very specific, we can provide something back. But I am going to talk a little bit about it. I don't have an example specifically in the presentation, but I'm going to talk about it in the use cases.
Okay, great. Next question is there any advantage to exporting replication sets to populate an external data warehouse versus using a JDBC connection directly with like dbeaver? Does that make
So
sense to you?
you can't hit a JDBC driver against the Infor Multi-Tenant cloud. So if I want to be able to have that replication set is what I'm going to have to use. So hope that answers the question. If there's more follow-up, please let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
That's it right now.
Okay. So use cases. So where have we used specifically replication sets for previous customers, and what did that look like? So I have three here. The first being, in essence, kind of what replications were designed for. How do I replicate data on premise? I have a cloud system. I have on-prem. I need to do some stuff. How do I do that? The second one being kind of similar, but a little bit different in the fact that I have a secondary on-premise process that is a snapshot of information, and I need to be able to pull that snapshot from the cloud in order to continue processing on premise. So kind of similar, but I'm going to talk about how they are different. And then the third one being a little bit more recent is identification of a specific set of employees and then making changes to those employee records based off of getting that data. So those are our three use cases, and I'm going to go into them a bit more detail. So the first one, which I said was kind of what it was designed for, right? So how do I replicate or take data from my multi-tenant cloud and move it to my on-prem system? So the customer had quite a few existing processes. The customer was going from Loss and System Foundation up to the multi-tenant GHR. They were going from HR LSF up to the cloud. And they had quite a few on-premise processes that worked from an on-premise database. So with the implementation of going to the multi-tenant cloud, they would no longer be pulling that data and getting it to their on-premise database for that processing. So it, in essence, broke that existing process they had in place. So that was the request that was brought to us, and our solution was a replication set. So we defined a replication set that had multiple business classes defined within the replication set. So we pulled data from the employee business class, the work assignment business class, the manager and the HR organization unit, just to name a few. There were others in there, but we pulled data from those business classes, and then we ran the process to run daily and send the deltas. So if the data was changing inside of those business classes, we were then going to send the data over to their on-premise SFTP. Their on-premise process would pick it up, update their database tables, and allow their processes to continue to run. In essence, what replication sets were created for. So we had a problem of how do we get it down, continue processing elsewhere. It wasn't meant to run in the multi-tenant cloud. It was meant to run on premise for totally secondary processing, but they needed HR related data to do it. So we sent it across via the replication set. Okay. The second one, which is similar in that the customer had a pretty extensive existing user provisioning process where they were getting a snapshot of employee demographic related information. And they were getting that from their existing ERP, which was not Infor, but they were getting it from their existing ERP, and they were sending it to their own kind of warehouse related database in order to feed downstream systems and update those systems based off that demographic data. But they were not able to accept a multi-tiered file, so multiple business classes in a single file, or they needed a single file with the related information within the file. So I have a single record for each employee, but I needed all the related information tied to that employee from different business classes. So similar, but a bit different. So the solution on here still was a replication set, right? So we did the replication set and I talked about what are accessible so I can access the relations in the database or inside of GHR and FSM. Those I can have. Even the ones that I define, I can gain access to those relations at all. as well. I'm sorry. So we started from the employee business class because that's where a good 2/3 of the information or half the information was from. And then from there, we used the relations to gain access to the other data elements that we needed into the employee business class. We did end up creating a few configuration console fields on employee, which were derived fields. We're able to code the relation piece needed within the configuration, and then we pulled in that derived field from employee into there. So I not only accessed the employee business class, I used the relations that are in the system to get to other business classes, and then I was able to grab my config console user fields that I created as well. Okay. And then that was sent to their on-prem or their SFTP file server for processing. And that was scheduled daily, and they picked that up daily, allowed them the ability to then continue that user provisioning process, the pretty extensive user provisioning process that they already had in place. Okay. And then the third, and this is the one that I'm pretty excited about. I don't know about anyone else. So in IPA, we've been pulling data, and I know I personally have been doing this for a while now. We use IPA to pull and iterate through our record set. So how do I know who I need to update? I use the landmark transaction node. I use other nodes to iterate through and find who I need to get within the system, and then be able to make whatever edits or changes or do what I need to as I'm iterating through. And I know that this can be pretty intense. It can take up a lot of memory, which I think is one area people have been seeing more lately. And I had a request that was for a kind of maintenance related update, and we were not able to fulfill the request via configuration console based off the changes that were there. So we then started looking at IPA or Infor process automation to do the same thing. But the problem was not able to pull the full data set via one landmark transaction node. So in essence, I would have had to iterate through the entire employee population twice in order to be able to get the information I needed to identify all the employee records that would need to be updated for payroll processing. So we needed to update data based off specific criteria within the system. So we looked at replication sets. Can I pull a set of data based off my multi-tiered condition, right? Because I said it was two different sets of criteria in order to get that data across. And we were successful, and it honestly was pretty awesome. So we were able to pull a replication set of data across, generate the file, and then the service I talked about earlier kicked off an IPA that then picked up the file. We're able to iterate through the process and make those changes. So prior to, we would have had to iterate through the entire employee population twice. Now I can run a replication set that takes mere minutes to generate my data set, and then I can process those records. And at that point, all I'm doing is making updates. So that is quick. It's less than a second to change in order for those changes to be made. So it's a pretty drastic improvement in the ability to pull the data and iterate through the process and make sure that we were trying to use the most efficient process available to do that. So I'm pretty excited about this one personally, but this was a big win in our case of not hitting those memory issues, not having long time running processing, trying to find all those employees, and getting us the ability to make those changes. Okay. So that's what I have. Are there any other questions out there?
So there was an addition to that last question.
Yes.
And Bill, feel free to unmute yourself if I'm not conveying your question right. So I'll just reiterate what he asked first and then tell you the additional. So he said, is there any advantage to exporting replication sets to populate an external data warehouse versus using a JDBC connection directly with like dbeaver? And so then it says JDBC to data lake after replication.
Oh, so sending the data to the data lake and then accessing it from the data lake? Is that what you're asking about? Did I
Again,
get that?
Bill. Bill, feel free to unmute yourself
Yeah.
if you want, but I'll keep watching
I'm
the
sorry.
chat to see if he's
Hey,
okay. Go.
so this is Bill. We use
Hi, Bill.
replication sets a lot to the data lake
Okay.
for burst reporting and for DPM.
Mhm.
And we did connect to the data lake for our internal data warehouse through the JDBC using dbeaver. And
Okay.
but the issue we have is if we want to put external data back into the data warehouse to pick up in the burst model, it's very complex, and you basically need to be a burst developer to get it to work correctly.
Mhm.
So we found that sort of lacking if we want to bring in external data into the data lake. So I'm just wondering, is there a better way to get data out than a JDBC connection, or is there any advantage to exporting replication sets to populate an external data warehouse versus just a direct connection like that?
Yeah, it sounds like you need the data in the data warehouse for the burst reporting as well, right?
Right, but like we can't add external sources like from Epic or another external database into the data lake, and then picking that up in the burst model, it was very difficult, or we struggle with that.
Okay. So you were thinking of doing that from an internal perspective and not from the data lake?
Right. So we were thinking of exporting data to our data warehouse, or
Mhm.
and then doing the reporting from there, since we wouldn't have to
Sure.
incorporate that into the burst model, and then use
Yeah,
con
I mean,
or whatever.
it's an extra hop in my mind because your replication set is sending the data to the data lake. So you're not only processing the replication set, but then on the Ion perspective, you're getting that into the data lake, and obviously where you can use it through Compass, and you can do those types of things so that Burst can access it. And then from there, you're using the JDBC driver to grab it from the data lake and potentially move it. You could go directly from Infor replication sets directly to your on-premise. You wouldn't have to go to the data lake first. So I think you would reduce a hop in there and get it quicker to your on-premise, especially if you weren't going to be utilizing Burst to do that reporting.
Okay.
Okay. Any other insight or other questions?
Hey, Robert, this is Jared. I have a question about the last use case you talked through.
Mm-hmm.
Because that has a lot of moving pieces, how do you manage the kind of the operational overhead? There's different schedules to consider. I'm guessing, we've got to schedule the replication set, have to schedule the IPA. How did you, kind of keep that clean and orderly with so many moving pieces?
Great question. The coolest thing about that is that it's only one schedule. So all I need to schedule is the replication set. The replication set in and of itself will then kick off the IPA, and I don't have to actually do anything to schedule the IPA. When the replication set finishes successfully and writes the file, it will then generate the service definition or trigger, in essence, the service definition, which then runs the IPA and picks up the file. So it's really, and what I thought was pretty amazing, that it could then pick it up from there. And I only have to worry about scheduling that replication set in order for that process to run. So I think it's pretty cool, but
What is the action that triggers that service definition? Can you comment on
the
that?
replication set itself, it's actually a generation, it's a trigger to the service definition. It's on the replication itself. So I can actually pull in a built-in service definition to my replication set, and it's baked into the system that when my replication set finishes to trigger the service definition, which in essence is my IPA. And you can do other things there. In my case, I needed to update some employee-related information, but I definitely see if I needed to massage some stuff, if I needed to potentially crosswalk some stuff, if I needed to send out the file in a different format, I could easily do those things in IPA, and I've heard other examples of that. But it is pretty cool, the ability to kind of generate that data set. It's changed my way of thinking, because in the past, I've had processes that would run, the closest I could get it would be an hour to pull quite a bit of data, don't get me wrong, but a replication set can pull that same information in a matter of minutes. So you can see a pretty drastic improvement.
So that's all really interesting to me. That's even a little bit more slick than I was thinking. But let me play devil's advocate for a second. Can you go the other way at all? I mean, can we trigger can we automatically trigger a replication set to run based on something else, or does that have to originate within kind of the replication set menu? You know, can I use, in other words, configuration console or IPA to hit some kind of action that will trigger a replication set?
Interesting question. I haven't tried it, but it'd be something that we could definitely try
Interesting.
to generate that from an action. So maybe from almost like a higher action or an action itself, if we needed to generate something, could we do that the opposite way? But I thought of it more the other way and trying to get the data, because it allows me the ability to pretty quickly grab a large amount of data and provide it to my IPA, which in turn, in my mind, some of the flows I've written would be drastically reducing that time frame of iterating through those records to find the ones I need.
Yeah, yeah, and it's, I think it's probably hard to overstate how much of an improvement that use case scenario that you talked through is over, what that would have looked like a couple years ago,
Yeah.
much less 10 years ago. That's that's a much cleaner way to handle those moving pieces, not to mention certainly a much more efficient way to get that data. So that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I remember writing a process years ago that did iterate through trying to find all active employees and terms like the past 90 days. And I ran through 2 iterations of landmark transaction nodes to do that because I just couldn't get it in a single one. So replication sets, that was like really the beginning of replication sets. But nowadays I would go straight to replication set. So pretty cool. Any other questions?
Anything else in the chat? So I can turn
Okay.
it back over to Luke.
Did Luke drop off? I think he had to go.
Oh, did he? Oh, okay. So
I can take this if you want me to.
Sure.
So we have a few remaining October series in our informative Fridays. This Friday we have the asset management V10 to V11. We have employee and manager homepage basics on Friday, October 15th. And then coming up after that, we have Friday, October 22nd, creating and scheduling recurring jobs, report distribution groups, as well as structure relations and you. And then on Friday 29th, we have a continuous performance engagement, and then a financial section of Ask Me Anything. So if you have questions, please email rebecca.bales@balesllc.com, or comments on the LinkedIn post. Here we have a link here. So if you get the presentation, you'll be able to have that. But definitely a pretty cool session on Friday, October 29th. And then informative Fridays. So the next quarter, so we'll be wrapping up this month. Why it does that? The next informative Friday set will be coming in February. So look coming out of what those are going to be. Please follow us LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Work Out Loud, stay informed on social media. And then the final is our coffee with a consultant. So if you have a question or you have a particular system feature, please either go to the website, www.balesllc.com, or email molly.velasco@balesllc.com. Set you up with someone, I think is it a 30-minute session, Molly?
That's correct.
Yeah,
Free
so 30-minute session with one of our consultants, kind of start talking through what those questions are, that particular system feature, and then if there's additional engagement, we can work through that. So definitely a pretty cool feature. Anything else?
I think that's it. Thanks, everybody. The session was recorded, and I'll be sending it out. And please follow up if you have any questions.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate
Thanks, Robert.
it. Have a
Great
good
job.
weekend.